Today's guest is Jason Adolf. He's a vice president of global public sector at Appian. Jason and I recently met at a local networking event, and I invited him to join me on the podcast. And I really appreciate you taking me up on that invitation, Jason.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So for those who haven't had a chance to meet you at an event and talk to you a little bit, tell us about your background, where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
So, and I appreciate the little primer of how far back to go. I've had kind of an interesting, I'd say I had a pretty interesting change in direction from what I thought I would be doing to where I am today. So I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I went to high school in Richmond, and then thought I wanted to be in international business. Okay, so just as an international business major, I wanted to go to a city school. So I ended up at GW here in DC, and I realized I don't speak more than one language, and everybody else here speaks multiple languages. And so I quickly decided that, I'm going to be a finance major, because then I can just speak English, and I'm probably good at that. And so timing wise, I was taking all these finance classes, and this is in the late 90s. And then I got hooked up with an internship, which is what everybody at GW did, with an organization called it was called like the Internet Trade Association. It was the first Internet Trade Association in the late 90s. And this was like party time for all the internet vendors. I was making a ton of money being this Internet Trade Association, because people were paying back then. And so I'm getting ready to graduate like in December of 2000, thinking, oh man, I'm going to go into the internet business. I'm going to be rich. I'm getting a BMW. Wrong. So you graduate, I graduated like December of 2000. I got a job. I worked that job for one calendar day and hated it because it was not what I wanted to do. Quit. And then the internet bubble burst, like right in January of 2001. And so I was then unemployed for 4 months. I then got a job during the recession selling job postings on the internet. So there was a company called headhunter.net, which I think got bought by like Career Builder and Monster and some of those guys. But I was basically selling job postings, like internet job postings during a recession, right? So nobody's posting jobs on the internet. And this was early, right? This is like 2000. I got laid off, and I got laid off. I think I got laid off August 31st of 2001. So great, I'm collecting unemployment, and then 10 days later, 9/11 happens, and I'm unemployed. And so I was getting unemployment checks, and that's a very humbling experience when you're that young. And 9/11 happens, and I'll never forget the governor in Virginia changed the unemployment rate, like made it an extra $100, and it was retroactive. So I got like a $500 check. I called my dad. I said, I just got a bonus for being unemployed. And I think during 2001, I was unemployed until almost the day after Christmas. So 8 of the 12 months I was unemployed. I did, I think, maybe 60 job interviews. And I think I got offered maybe 5 or 10 jobs, and ended up interviewing at a company called SRA International. And SRA was a predecessor company to CSRA, which became General Dynamics. And I got hired to be an executive assistant. And so I did that job for like 3 months. Then I moved into doing project finance. I was a finance major. Maybe a year after that, I built the first intranet for the finance team. And that turned into me then building intranets for the company, and then selling the company essentially on the first workflow project right around 2004, which was at the time was when InfoPath came out.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're like, well, you're not going to be in finance anymore. You're going to work for the CIO, in the CIO shop. And so I ended up doing an early, process automation project on a product called BizFlow. And so still I'm doing, back office stuff. And then we said, well, you've built it internally, so let's sell it. And so then I started selling it to customers. Did that for a couple of years at SRA. Got picked up and moved to a company called Serco. And Serco hired me to kind of run their BPM practice, which was non-existent. And so I was had a non-existent practice to run, which over time we built into quite a few people, doing a number of different projects. And so I had consulting folks, I had BI folks, and people that did some like we used to call it computer-aided facilities management, like so FM facilities management stuff. And I did Appian work. So I had done some Appian work at SRA alongside big Oracle projects and stuff like that. And we won a couple of big things at Serco using Appian. And you know, a couple of years later, I was looking to make a change and wanted to go to the product side, and it turned out that Appian had a role where they basically wanted me to be a salesperson and essentially sell Appian as their industry leader. And I was like, well, I can talk. So, you know, I turned from international business to unemployed to finance to tech by not choice. Well, kind of was always a geek. Yeah, ended up being trying to build a business around Appian here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is an interesting journey. So, oh man. Now I take it though, that finance degree, this is something I talk about a lot with people as they're when I mentor a lot of people as they're going through college and answer questions. I imagine that has been very helpful no matter what your role is.
So yes, when you get a business degree, there's a way of thinking, there's a way of talking and speaking and grounding the conversation in business versus grounding it in tech.
Yeah.
And principally, one of the things I do, I write a lot of proposals. I mean, I've contributed to proposals. So I was very fortunate at SRA when I was very junior in my career to be brought into a really excellent proposal shop. And being able to describe things in a way that actually made business sense versus just, oh yeah, well, the technology could do it. I mean, you know this. I can make technology do anything I want, but whether the cost makes, and you know, the cost benefit has to exist for somebody to buy it. And I think that is a very grounding thing. I think it's a very, very grounding to be able to have that kind of background.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, I'm a technologist. I got my bachelor's in computer science, but I highly recommend to many people, that's great because that's what you want to do, right? You want to get into the nuts and bolts of technology. But when you start to realize as your career goes by, eventually you're going to most likely go into management. It depends, right? There are people who don't. They go maybe even to deeper science side of
Yep.
computing. But if you eventually go into management, I highly, highly recommend to them take some level of business classes or your next level degree, have a heavy focus in business. Even if you still got some of the tech stuff, have a heavy focus in business classes because there's so much translation you need to do between tech. And as you said, if you come in from a business perspective first and kind of technology second, and I think that's the right way. It's going to be much more in alignment with what the business really needs.
Yeah, and I think you and I even talked about this over a drink. Was, you know, our customers are mission customers. These people own a function.
Yeah.
So the principal goal for them is to deliver a mission that they've been budgeted to do, and to be successful in that mission. And so they're getting people telling them that tech can do, you know, work magic for them. And there's 100 different ways to probably skin the cat, like, you know, but is it viable for them to do it that way? And, you know, I was fortunate, like with SRA's very strong technical culture. And so I kind of grew up and grounded in sound technical principles. And then Serco was a BPO provider. And so you got to look at, okay, well, how are you going to do this? So, you know, SRA was a build and hand over to the government. I build your system, I give it to you, you operate it. Serco was an operator.
Yeah.
And so you then got to say, okay, well, you know, the government doesn't have unlimited money to build things. And so being able to see how people are using the system and actually they're employees of your company, and so you have much deeper access to them to understand how they want to do things, how they want to use things. It absolutely makes a big difference. And I can tell you, when we were doing at Circo, when we did the eligibility support contract for the Affordable Care Act, that contract, you were starting up a new government service that had no volumetrics, so nobody knew how many people were going to apply.
Right.
And so, I went back to my Microsoft Excel roots and I put together some pretty extensive models to try to give the government some idea of how much would it cost to actually do the things they were asking us to do. Because, it's one thing to take over a new contract, or to take over a contract that's been operating. You could go to the passport office, they could tell you how many people get passports every year. But in 2013, nobody could tell you how many people were going to apply for Obamacare. Right. And so how do you build an operation where you have no idea what that number is? And, so, if you going back to your thought about the, having the degree help, like that absolutely made a huge difference.
Yeah.
A huge difference.
Wow. And so I like that transition you made from Circa to Appian, because you were so already in the platform. Did that really set you up for success to switch gears and be at the product company?
Yeah. And let me tell you what one of my kind of thoughts here is. So I had been a practitioner. So back in 2008, I actually did an Appian project. Okay. And I built the stuff, and I built some stuff for a couple of years, but not like you would do today. But so I took that experience, and then you go to somewhere like Circo. And so when we're bidding solutions where Appian is going to be part of it, I have some grounding to say, all right, that's low, medium, hard. Because I have a general relative idea of what it's going to take to do that. Then at Circo, we're doing very large scale deployments, like mega projects, right? And so then you carry that into the product side. And so now you're on the other side, right? You have vendors that come to you and they make all sorts of promises about what they can and can't do, how easy it's going to be and stuff. Well, I can talk to them about how it actually works. And I'm a big believer in, which is why I'm a big believer in, if you're going to sell the product, you should be trained on how it works. Because if you understand it, you can explain it to somebody better. And, explaining low-code software development is not as easy as explaining like, hey, I've got a grant system and you want to buy a grant system. I have to explain to you that you're going to build the grant system, which explodes people's heads. And I have to explain to people that, no, look, it's actually, that is what people do. And it is safe to do that. And let me tell you why. And let me tell you where you're going to trip up and where it's going to be easy and what's going to be hard. And so I think it absolutely makes a huge difference, because you don't unlearn those skills. Like, certainly there's technological changes, but you don't unlearn how to be good at operating a program. And I watched fabulous program managers throughout my career at SRA and Circo understand how to guide a customer to an outcome and do it in an ethical way. And so, great, like, this, like, the hardest thing to do as an integrator is tell your customer no. And sometimes you have to tell them no. And you have to tell them, no, you can't do that, or no, that's not a good idea. And that's not easy. And I will tell my customers, don't do that. Or, and fortunately they trust me. So, fortunately they trust me. So yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, but we both want, right, successful outcomes. And to do that, you on the product side, and I've met many people at different product companies over my career. My daughter even works for product companies, so we have lots of these conversations. The product companies know their product. They know what it can do. They know what it can't do. They know who has pushed it to the edge and been successful, and who has realized, that wasn't quite a good idea. And so leveraging your company's knowledge in your instance for your platform would be wise for somebody in the business side to go, okay, I believe you, right? You know your product inside and out. And then on the business side, right, it then opens up to creativity within the boundaries.
Sure. Right. And so I think the other thing that I think the other thing that's most important is, and it was a couple of years ago when somebody brought this up, and it was kind of eye-opening, which is on the technology side, on the product side, a lot of people assume that you, the buyer, know how to buy this. Like you probably know how to buy a car, you know how to buy clothes, groceries, stuff like that. But you may never have bought an enterprise software product because the system that you're replacing might be older than you've worked there, right? Or right. And so we in some cases make these assumptions that when we go into these sales cycles and talk to customers, that they understand what to do next. Like they know the FAR, right? They know what like the process, they have to go bid stuff, but how would they know what they're buying? Like how would they know what to ask for? And I think it's important that we have educated buyers. Like, you know, the other thing, going back to your previous statement about wanting them to be successful, is we also want them to use the stuff we make. And so, you know, you have all these customers, everybody's talking about generative AI and all these, you know, bleeding edge things for government. And all that's great. But if nobody has any idea what to ask for to use it, then you've kind of equalized the playing field for lower cost providers and, you know, maybe less innovative companies. And so we have to tell them, you know, here's what you need to do. Here's how you do it. And I think when we do a good job of that, we get good results, good outcomes.
I think that's a great point. By talking about Gen AI, you know, we're here in the middle of 2024. Gen AI is the hot topic of the day, but I hear a lot of people talking about its capability as a technology. I don't hear a lot of people talking about how it fulfills their business mission. So and it's not that it can't, right? But that's not what people are talking about.
And what's the other thing that I think people aren't seeing yet is how much it actually costs to do it. And, you know, so you know, when you get into topics like tokens, like buying tokens for, you know, processing these generative AI tools. So let's take an example, okay, would be business value in case management. I've got a case that's been running for years. I'm managing somebody's chronic condition as the government, and I've got case notes for interacting with this person over a decade. Okay, there could be hundreds of notes. So you call in and I pick the phone up and maybe I have a generative AI summary of your case history. It's not a substitute, but it's, okay, I got it at a glance, here's what's going on, and so I can get started, right?
Mm-hmm.
Documents, government processes just full of large volumes of documents, you know, in investigations and benefits case management, things like that. And those documents, a lot of pages. Well, if you want to use generative AI to summarize documents with lots of pages, that's lots of tokens. And so what's really going to be interesting to me is I think we've done a good job of demonstrating the value of, from an operator's perspective. Okay, so here's your caseworker. They're going to have this thing that will generate summaries. It'll allow you to kind of inquire into these documents to have it pull out information, might relate things together. It might, you know, perform some other time-saving functions. The question is how much does it cost to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, and how do the behavior work? So if I'm one of those people that just like, my behavior is every time I switch between tabs, it has to regenerate all that stuff. Okay, how much money did it cost me to generate that summary? And was it worth the time? Was it worth the money? And so right now what you're seeing is a ton of possibility, and it's cool. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff. But I'm waiting to see it get put into large scale production from an operator perspective. Now you flip that around and you start talking about the developer experience and you know, generating applications from, you know, code and stuff like that. And we do all that. We do those things. And I think, you know, the sad part is it's really cool. And it was cool for like a month when everybody came out with it. And now everybody does it. And so now everybody just realizes, okay, if your tool doesn't do, you know, you can't generate an entire application from like a prompt, then and you realize, like how far we've actually come where that's now just the standard in all of these platforms, is to be able to say, I want to generate a case management application that does this, and it builds it. And we think, oh, well, if you mean yours doesn't, like, it's like, so I wholeheartedly believe in it. I don't know that anybody's found the balance yet. And you may see this too, I mean, which is very few agencies have a real policy to implement this at any kind of scale. I mean, they're implementing skunk work projects, and some of them are putting it into production, but like large scale where a mission owner can just decide to use AI in there, not much yet.
No, and that's because most likely, because I know conversations I've been a party of, not just in my office, because actually in my office I don't have those conversations, but in other agencies that I interact with, it comes back to segmentation of the data. Even within an agency, there's data. There are different offices in a given agency aren't supposed to have access to certain information, right? It's got implications. It's got privacy implications. It's got sensitivity of some sort. And so Gen AI is actually exasperating an existing sensitive document problem that we were already trying to solve with different technologies to implement, digital rights management or whatever, so that even internally we don't accidentally show somebody something or
Sure.
send something externally that we shouldn't have sent externally. But those projects are still, for many agencies, in their infancy. And so Gen AI has come at almost the wrong time because we haven't solved that problem yet. If it had come just a little bit later, it'd probably been easier to introduce it or less risky to introduce it. But I do like what you said in terms of within a certain realm, there are some really great use cases, like say generating an application. Besides, of course, the QA aspect of that, right? You need to verify it's not inputted stuff into there that you didn't want to input it, added an old log4j class or something.
Sure.
But certainly that's a one-time execution, theoretically, a one-time execution, so that your cost value is pretty good. But you're right, on the other side, the summarization of documents and multiple queries on things, that cost equation, at least the costing models I've seen, it could get very, very expensive very quickly.
Right. And so that's where I think it's going to be really a really interesting 12 to 18 months with the government.
Yeah.
I also am looking at, and frankly, when I'm explaining generative AI or when I'm talking to a customer about generative AI, I'm looking for the least risky uses of Gen AI. So, my example about, okay, if I have access to this case, show me the summary of the case notes. Okay, well, that's fairly non-destructive, and you haven't, that's contained, right? Show me a summary of the documents related to this case. Okay, well, if I have access to the case and the documents, then fine, show me the summary, and okay, fine. It's what's been interesting to me is this, like going back to some of my like benefits programs that I've worked on is, okay, so the government needs to be correct. If I'm determining a benefit, I want to be correct 100% of the time, right? And so if all I'm doing is using AI and it's right 90% of the time, and I shift 10% of the work to the appeals, well, did I actually save any, did I save any time, right? Because as it's one thing to auto adjudicate something in the government. It's another thing to correct it. And the time horizon for corrections or rework is so much greater that, did you save any time? Like, and so I haven't seen anybody try to figure that out yet. So the way we're kind of approaching it is, the way we're approaching it as a product is, particularly with our government customers, is it's all here. We have it. You want it, we can do it. And all the stuff that you're hearing about, I can show you what it looks like. We can demo it. We can build it in production. We have a thing called private AI where we're, not commingling data in the AI services. Great. It's only your data. We're not training anybody else's models on your data. Okay, great. But we use a lot of the term future proofing in the way that we approach the market, which is maybe you don't need it now, but you want the insurance policy that we have it and that we're going in that direction so that when you have a policy, great, then you can use it. And I think that's the way we're starting to address it. So we train our partners, we train our employees on how to build applications that are set up for using tools like AI, so that you're not having to go and do a lot of rework. It's more additive. So I'm going to plug it in. I want it to work, right? And that's the best way to deal with most of these customers today.
Yeah.
As in, like, now.
It's a fantastic philosophy. I like it. As the customer, potential customer, I like it because you're right. It does set me up for success when my agency finally says, "Here's our Gen AI policy, and here's our guardrails for how you're allowed to use it." And then I can go, "Oh, great!" And there's a tool that I'm already using that has that capability, and now I understand how to put it in place. That's very smart. So, I mean, you've had a very interesting career and a couple dynamic twists and turns. When you look back at that career, what's something you wish that if I, came to you, Jason, and said, "You have a magic wand, let's fix something so it's better for those coming behind us." It could be anything, right? In our industry, it could be anything, people, technology, whatever. There's so many things that come into play, government, industry interaction, whatever. What to you have you seen that you wish we would take a look at again and maybe, find some efficiency, some change opportunity there? And I'll caveat, you may not have the solution today, but let's put something out there for people to start thinking about.
That's a good question. The number one thing is the relationship between the government and the vendor is oftentimes so at arm's length that while you're trying to be fair, you're also, as you mentioned earlier, we're the experts on the thing that we built. And if you can't ask us a question, like if my car broke down, I can take it to the car dealer and the expert will tell me what's wrong with my car.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of instances, the government can't do that or won't do that. And there's 100% difference in outcomes when the collaboration is better between the government and industry, whether that's through the solicitation process or through the actual life cycle of a program. It always turns out better because everybody's incentives are in the right place. The government wants the mission to doesn't want to be dragged up on Capitol Hill with an audit.
Right.
We want the mission to be successful, right? We want the use case, the reference, the past performance. And so it's always been minor frustration when you have a program where we know everybody's in alignment. You want it to succeed, I want it to succeed, but there's something artificial that's preventing us from making it succeed. There's no other reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
In any other industry, in any other part of the world, or in any other, not part of the world, in any other private industry, we could have that collaborative relationship where we work towards a resolution. Whereas here, in some cases, we are governed in a way that caused the ship to sink for no reason. And I'll tell you, one of the best things that we've seen over the last couple of years is the way that Department of Defense does the OTAs, the other transaction authorities. We don't win all of them. We win a lot. Okay, we like it. But if you think about it this way, would you rather spend a little bit of money to be sure or to be more sure of the outcome than to just take my 50-page proposal and hope that I'm not lying to you or that I'm not misrepresenting something to you? And the fact that they're doing that and they compare apples to apples, they have it gives smaller vendors, our biggest competitors, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Microsoft, they're exponentially larger than us. We don't have that resource. But when you get into an OTA, it allows a more nimble vendor to compete because they're leveling the playing field. So what is the output of these people doing this work for this period of time?
Yep.
And it's a phenomenal way to go through it. It can be painful sometimes. It can be dragged out, but the government ends up getting some higher level of assurance because you're not throwing away work, and they actually pressure tested what you told them that you were going to do. And I think, while it may not be a solution for everywhere, in general, I think if that collaboration was brought into the modern era versus, more ancient FAR rules, you'd probably see better outcomes.
I like that one. I would completely agree with you. I know GSA has been trying to educate people on OTAs and the concepts of OTAs, not to a large amount of success. I don't know. It is interesting that in the civilian side, we have never, DoD is just unique. I used to do a lot of DoD contracting when I was in industry. It's unique in that their mission pace and their mission importance all automatically puts them in a more experimental, risk-taking.
Agreed.
And so up front, they're willing to do things like what you're talking about, where here's a little seed money, build me the app, build me this prototype app so I can see what your long-term vision is going to be based on your short-term output, right? And they do that for missile systems, they do that for aircraft, and they do it for software. And it's been very, very successful for them. But I don't think we have the same mindset, same mission mindset in many cases that DoD has. And I agree with you. We should shift that because we have some very, very important missions that, but they're not warfighter missions, right? But when I worked at USDA, we had the food safety mission. People could die if that product made it out of the factory with salmonella or whatever, if we didn't catch it before it made it out of the factory.
People can lose jobs, people can get homeless, people can be, not receiving medical benefits. So, again, we never take away from the DoD mission. It's just, there are important functions of government that rise to the level of, for that agency, being the critical mission. And okay, so why wouldn't you try it a little bit before you buy, and refine and things like that. So, I mean, again, it's a little bit of a soapbox, but I've just seen how much different the outcomes can be when we go through this process together. And doesn't mean to win them all, but I would say absolutely we get the level of assurance goes way up on both sides. We can, and the other thing that happens in a lot of those cases is we can refine our price because we gave you a price based on the, 10-page solicitation you gave us, or we can work together for 6 months and I know exactly what you want, and it might actually cost you less.
That is so true. I mean, that's why in the general scheme of things, it's not law by any means, not guaranteed. That's why incumbents have a leg up, if you will, in recompetes, because they know what the mission is now. They've done what you're talking about. They're not just looking at words on the paper. They were involved in execution. And so typically it's theirs to lose unless they just had a bad relationship and a bad function, right? And that happens. So yeah, I like that idea. And certainly civilian needs to get more experience in that space. So what's coming up for you here in the near future?
Travel, I think, is probably the I'm fortunate enough to be responsible with our global public sector, and so get to go to some interesting places. I just came back from the UK and it was hot. And they don't believe in air conditioning the same way that we do here. So going around London in a suit when it's 85 degrees is, like I said, you realize how nice the metro is because it's air conditioned all the time. But probably I'm going to spend some time in Australia and right back to the UK and parts of Europe. And interestingly enough, we have some newer customers in Latin America and the Caribbean, and might find a reason to have to go to visit some of them as well. But we've got a pretty busy second half coming up. A lot of cool stuff coming out with the product, and so being able to get on the road and meet people, I'm excited about it.
Oh, Jason, I'm pretty excited. As you know, I've been a fan of Appian from a low-code perspective as somebody who came from hardcore software engineering. I've bought into the low code revolution, and Appian's certainly a huge player in that space. So thank you for so much for spending the time with me today.
My pleasure, and I appreciate you having me.